Hello, everybody. Today we are going to focus on government basics. And specifically, we're going to look at part one of this three-part segment, which is basic definitions and types of government. So that's where we'll start. Here we go. Now, first off, we have to understand what is a government? And it's a good question to ask because, we talk about it all the time, but a lot of people don't necessarily think about it. A government is an institution through which a society makes and enforces its public policies. So first off, we have to figure out, well, what words don't we know here? Well, let's start with institution, okay? So an institution is a known body of some sort. Usually it's well regarded, okay? Society are all the people that make up an area. And public policies. So what are public policies? So what in the world does it mean? Let's run through it. So first off, we have to understand public policies. Public policies are things the government decides to do. So a lot of times public policies are laws and rules and regulations and how things work out. So for example, when we think about a bus, pencils, desks, students, think about education. Education is something a government decides to do. In the United States, education is something that is decided upon by more local governments. And there's a lot of public policies that are made there. For example, at the local level with COVID-19, our superintendent and our school board had to make a lot of public policies about what's allowed in school. They made public policies about going more one-to-one with computers and things like that too. So what a government decides to do. Potholes, bridges, signs. That's transportation. Transportation is a big one for public policy. Government decides a lot of things about public policy and what to do with roads. Which new roads should be repaved? Where should we put in new drainage systems? Does Ellsworth need a second stop sign? Any of those things fit pretty well with public policy with transportation. Hornet, Hummer, Abrams, Howitzer. How about this one? You know this one? So this one fits for defense. Those are all different weapons. So the government has to make a lot of decisions about where are we going to fight? Are we going to fight or try to have peace? Are we sending soldiers? Are we going to spend on new technology for weapons? All those different kinds of things. So public policy can be anything the government's deciding to do. And so when we go back, so a government is a known body through which our people in our area make new rules and laws and enforce those. So it's the body that makes and enforces new laws and new rules in an area and continues to enforce the old rules as well. That's what we could say for government. Okay. Public policy, can you think of other areas where our government makes a lot of rules and regulations? If you're going to get your driver's license, a lot of rules and regulations there, right? When you think about on a school level, you think about like sports and the rules and regulations that are made there. That's not necessarily government per se, but it is public policy that's made at a different level. So lots of public policies. So try to make your own definition for government, using that definition as kind of your centerpiece. Okay, so one of the big words we have to understand when it comes to government is the word state. Now, we usually think about state and we think about Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, New York, California, all that kind of stuff. Realistically, when you talk about the word state, those are like small S states. When you think about the capital S state, we're talking about a country normally. So state does not mean Wisconsin. It means a country like Canada or Mexico or the US or China, things like that. So here are the four things you have to have in order to have a state. Number one, you have to have population. Okay, so you have to have people, which makes sense. It's hard to have a country without people. 2, a state must be comprised of land with territory that has known borders. And so it has to be agreed upon where the borders are. Imagine if the United States and Canada didn't have a known border. It kind of shifted. Well, you can't have a nation without borders, technically. 3rd is sovereignty. In order to have a state or a nation, you need to have your own power. So if Mexico no longer has any control at all, it isn't really a state anymore because it doesn't have control of the situation. You need to be able to make decisions, public policies, those kind of things. And lastly, a state needs to have a government that is organized, that is in control. So population, territory, power, and a government. Those 4 things. So let's look, are these considered a state or not, based on this definition? Cuba. The answer is yes, Cuba is a state. They have people, they have known territory, they have control of their country, and they have their own government. California. California is not considered a state, capital S. Which of the 4 is the reason why? Well, the reality is they have a population, they have known territory, they have a government, but they don't have complete sovereignty because California is run by the United States. So there are ways that they cannot make rules. So California doesn't fit. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a tricky one. It's not technically a state because it's a territory. So it doesn't have full sovereignty. So that one doesn't fit. The Oneida Nation, Native Americans in the United States and Wisconsin. Technically, yes, they are a state. They have a population, territory, government, and sovereignty. And so Wisconsin Indians are their own states, their own nations. So there's 11 nations in Wisconsin, which is kind of crazy to think about, of Native Americans. So, and Syria. Now this is when it gets tricky. What happens when you have a country that has a civil war? It's still a state, but it's on the verge. Excuse me. Because you have the sovereignty is kind of in question and the government's power is in question as well. So every state needs to have a government, and there's different types of governments. So we're going to look at these different types as we go along. The first type is direct democracy. Direct democracy is where citizens make all the decisions themselves. We have some direct democracy, a little bit. When we decided if we want to put more funding towards our own elementary school to make a new one, that was direct democracy. But in the United States, we're mainly a democratic republic, where the citizens vote to elect representatives that make decisions on their behalf. So we elect representatives, senators, presidents, mayors, school board members to make decisions for us. A dictatorship is where one person or a small group has complete control. Usually they have absolute authority. It can get kind of scary. A monarchy is where we have a king or queen in power, and usually the power runs through bloodlines. Sometimes they have absolute power, sometimes they don't. Anarchy is where there is no laws. A lot of kids talk about the movie The Purge, but there's very little government power, and usually you can do what you want. You don't see this often, but you do see it when a government fails before a new government's been put in place. One party is where one party is in control of the government. So imagine if the Republicans were in control of the United States government and the Democratic Party didn't exist or had no power. That'd be one party. And communism is a government that operates and owns all the land and industry. They have complete control of the land and the people in many ways. And the goal is to make all people equal. But we've also seen some problems in those attempts. So we see different governments around the world all over the place. We obviously have Democratic Republic in the United States, but as you can see with the green countries, they're also democracies with various forms. Some governments have a theocracy where it's more of a religious government. China has a communism. North Korea would be dictatorship. So we have monarchy in Saudi Arabia. So lots of different governments in different places. So I like to use this to kind of explain how it would work with a situation. In each of these situations, you're going to have two cows, all right, fitting for Ellsworth. And we're going to look at how does the government work. So direct democracy, you have two cows. After milking your cows, you and your neighbor all vote on who should get the milk. And so everybody together makes a vote to decide who should get the milk. That's a direct democracy. You're all voting together to decide who should get what resources, how they should be split up, things like that. And so direct democracy only works in a small society very well because everybody gets to vote on everything. And that's tricky. That takes a lot of time. Imagine if you had to go and vote on whether we were going to increase teacher pay, whether we were going to add in new roads, whether we were going to change the date of the Ellsworth Cheese Curd Festival. It takes a lot of time. So we don't see direct democracy a lot. But we do have the smaller, more local decisions, like should we build a new elementary school? At the county level, should we build a new prison? At the state level, you've seen some states like Colorado that have asked the people to vote on whether they feel recreational marijuana should be illegal or not. So direct democracy is used, but not a ton. Democratic Republic, this is the one that we know here in America. You have two cows. After milking your cows, elected officials whom you and your peers voted in position vote to get who gets the milk. So really this is pretty fitting. We have a lot of tax revenue in the United States, and our representatives and government officials at the local, state, and national level decide how is that tax revenue going to be used. Is it going to be used for roads in our town, or is it going to be used for a stadium to be built in Milwaukee? Are we adding in more National Guard members, or are we putting more money towards education? So our elected officials make those decisions. That's how a democratic republic works. In a dictatorship, very, very different. You have two cows. The government takes the cows and gives you nothing for them. If you complain about it, they put you in jail or shoot you. Everything's just changed, right? And that's because you have no power anymore. The power rests with the dictator. They get to decide everything and they get to take control. So pretty harsh way to live life many times. A monarchy, where we have a king or a queen. You have two cows. The monarch allows you the privilege of milking your cows and giving him half the milk. If you complain, the monarch will take both your cows and the milk. And so monarchies differ. It depends on the situation. But if you have a true monarchy where a king or queen is in rule, they're going to make the rules, and their family will continue to make the rules. But some monarchies don't have real government power. If you look at the monarchy in the United Kingdom, really, the queen doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of actual power in the government. It's more of a democracy. So it depends on the situation for monarchy. Totalitarian, you have two cows. The government takes the cows and the political party in charge decides what to do. If you complain about it, they put you in jail or kill you. So one party is, the party decides everything. And so I mentioned before, let's say it's the Republican Party. Now, some people that are Republicans might be like, yes, we have the only party. But what about the other half of America? Well, the other half of America doesn't get a say anymore. Or if it was the Democratic Party and the Republicans had no control. And so this one party is deciding everything for you. China has a one-party government. It's the Communist Party. And basically, when you elect people, they have to be from the Communist Party. So you don't really get a say on who your government is or what is done. You lose a lot of that power. Communism, you have two cows. The state takes both and gives you some milk. So in communism, get rid of private property. The government owns your house. They own your businesses, all of that. And you basically work for hopefully a fair share of what is being produced. Oftentimes, though, it's not a fair share that you get. It's a little bit less. So take a second, make your own scenario for anarchy, that absence of government. You have two cows, and what happens? Usually what I do for explaining anarchy is I have people look out at the parking lot and say, you see that big truck there? I like that truck. I'm going to take it, right? Because in anarchy, there's no rules. So if I go out and kill the person that owns the truck, I can take the truck. It's free, right? However, somebody else could, hurt or kill me to take that truck away from me. So having no rules sounds like fun until somebody's violating your rights to get what you have. Anarchy is a scary situation. All right, next we're going to move into who can participate in government. How often are citizens involved, or is it just an individual that makes decisions? So we're going to run through this list. Direct democracy, what do you think? Who gets to participate in government and how often do they? So take a second, think about that. And direct democracy, all citizens get to vote on all decisions. There's no government type where people have more of a say than direct democracy, because you get to vote on all decisions. And a lot of people would hate it because they may not want to be voting on a sewer treatment system for Ellsworth. But you get to. So that's direct democracy. We don't see that very often, except for small decisions, like we said, with building the school or the prison, those kind of things. Democratic republic. Who gets to say there? Well, citizens get a say in that they vote for the representatives, and then the representatives make the decisions for them. And so, you and I, if we're 18 or older, when it comes to November, we get to have a say on who the president's going to be, who some of the senators are going to be, who some of the representatives are going to be, maybe a village president, maybe a sheriff, maybe school board members, things like that. So we get to choose the people, and then they're going to make decisions for us. And so that means that if they make decisions we don't like, maybe we vote them out. That's how an average citizen holds power in a democratic republic. Third one, dictatorship. Who has the power there? That's going to be no one gets to participate unless the dictator allows it. So you and I as citizens have absolutely no power unless the dictator gives it to us, which is pretty scary. Now, a monarchy. For monarchy, the royal family makes decisions. They decide who gets to have power. They decide if some people are going to have government positions or not, if it's a true monarchy. If it's a monarchy with democracy, that's different. Then people may have voting rights, things like that. Anarchy. Who gets to participate in anarchy in the government? It's a trick question. There is no government. People do what they want. Everybody's like their own government. So anarchy is the absence of all government and the total freedom to do what you want, including violating other people's rights. As we talked about with one party, that's a situation where leaders in one party get a say. So if you're one of those leaders, congratulations, you get a say. If not, stinks to be you, sorry. And communism. In communism, the Communist Party controls government. So they get to decide what everybody else gets. They get to decide what your pay is, what your housing looks like, what freedoms and rights you have in a country. And so, it's supposed to be that all people are part of that Communist Party and get a say, but quite often that's not the case. Very few people in communist governments have gotten a say. Communist governments have become dictatorships in most countries that have had them. So that's what we see for who can participate in government. So there's three different types of distribution of power. There's unitary, federal, and confederate. If you have a unitary government, all power is held by a single central government. That'd be like if the United States had one government and it was the national level. The national level government has complete control of everything. So they decide everything that happens in Wisconsin and in Ellsworth, which is crazy to think about. It'd be really hard for a big country like ours. Imagine if the government in Washington, D.C. had to decide all our decisions for schools, all our decisions for roads, all our decisions for everything. It would be chaos because they'd have to make the decisions for thousands of different places. So unitary government can work, but you do need a smaller country. United Kingdom has unitary government. They're much smaller than the United States. In the United States, we have a federal government where the power is divided between your national, your state, and your local levels. And so each level has different powers. The local level controls Ellsworth, the state level controls Wisconsin, and the national level controls everything else. And then a confederate government's a little different. We had the Confederacy, obviously, during the Civil War, but the United States also started as a confederate government. where the states work together, but ultimately the state has the most power, and the national government doesn't tell it what to do. And so with federal government, the national level's at top. With a confederate government, the power's divided a lot. So looking at what type are we going to see for each of these? In a direct democracy, you're going to see either unitary government or possibly a confederation. If all the people are making decisions, it's a smaller area and they're making them for themselves. In a democratic republic, we see all types. It depends on the situation. You could have unitary, confederate, or federal. It just depends on the size of the country and their practices in the past and things like that. A dictatorship is definitely unitary. You have one government ruled by the dictator. Monarchies are typically unitary because you have the king and queen are in charge of everything. Anarchy often doesn't have any of these because there is no government. If it does have a government that forms, it could be like a loose forming confederacy where different areas have different powers, things like that. One party is usually unitary, where that one party is making all decisions for all people. And communism is usually unitary because the Communist Party is usually making decisions for all people as well. Next, we're going to look at our branches, the legislative and the executive branches, and kind of look at how they operate. So if we look here, let me just move down in the corner. The legislative branch, as hopefully we know, makes the laws. They approve appointments. They have 2 senators for each state in our country. If you're in the Senate or the House of Representatives is based on population, but they're in charge of making laws and making rules and dealing with the budget. The executive branch, the president and agencies, sign the laws or veto the laws. They decide on federal judges with the legislative branch. It's a 4-year term, and they are carrying out the laws and making sure to have practices in place so that those laws can be enforced and followed. So let's look at, with these branches, do they work together independently? Is it executive power only, legislative power, or is there none? So for a direct democracy, with this, you're most likely going to see just a legislative government because the people hold the power. There's not necessarily an executive. In a democratic republic, the governments decide to work together. You have a legislative branch making the laws, and the executive branch's job is to enforce those laws. A dictatorship is executive only. The dictator makes the laws and enforces them, and there's no legislative branch that gets to make those decisions. A monarchy could be either. It could be the king or queen is making all the laws, or it could be that there's like a parliament, like our House of Representatives and Senate or Congress, and there's a king or queen. So it could be either of those two. Anarchy, there's no branches because there's no government at all. One party is either like an executive branch making all the laws, or you may have like a Congress and a bigger leader, depending on the situation. And communism could be a lot of different things, just depending on the situation and how that operates. So there we go. That's it for part 1. If you have questions or concerns, please let your teacher know. We'll help you out to figure it all out. Hopefully you're following along with your notes as that went along. And this information can be used when you look at the types of government worksheet and how that operates. Have a good day, everybody.